Namaste. A very good morning to everyone. I am thankful to Professor Dr. Ashish Pandeyji and the whole team of YOGASTHA Club of IIT Mumbai for inviting me to this conference. Today I am going to speak on conceptual and philosophical research in yoga. Generally, whenever we think about the research in yoga, on the gross level, we can say that there can be two types of research. One is theory-based research or text-based research, and the second one is something which is related to the practical aspect of yoga. So, this conceptual and philosophical research is more related to the textual studies of yoga, like Yoga Sutra or Hatha Yoga Pradipika or Vyasa Bhashya. So, whichever traditional texts are there in Sanskrit, or not only in Sanskrit, but in the other languages also, like in Tibetan, there is a Buddhist tradition of yoga, or even in the Jain tradition, also there is a lot of discussion about yoga. So, in Prakrit language or in Tibetan language, also there are texts on yoga, and if we study those texts in detail, then this conceptual and philosophical research is very much possible in the traditional scriptures and the commentaries which are written on the yoga. So in short, we will try to understand what this conceptual research means. So conceptual research is defined as a methodology wherein research is conducted by observing and analyzing the information which is already present on a given topic. It is related to abstract concepts or ideas, and philosophers have used conceptual research to develop new theories or interpret existing theories in a different light. Now, this is a very important aspect of the conceptual research because in Yoga Shastra, the scriptures are written like Yoga Sutra. There are so many traditional commentaries like Vyasa Bhashya or Vachaspati Mishra's commentary, Vijnan Bhikshu's commentary, even Bhoja Vritti. So there are so many scriptures, and more or less the concepts are same, but every commentator tried to interpret the concept in a different way. Every commentator tried to explain the concept in a different light. So this conceptual research is very much applicable for the yoga, and therefore it is very much important to study the scriptures of yoga and to find out whether there can be some other interpretation or we can understand the same concept in a different way. So this is very important aspect in Yoga Shastra. Now, whenever we want to go for conceptual research, there are few things that one has to consider. There are few things that a person has to understand, he has to think about them. The most important thing is what is the background of the author. Now, if we want to analyze, if we want to understand the writing of a person, whatever books he has written, whatever scripture that person has written, if we know biography of that person, then it becomes little easy for us to understand what could have been the thought process of that person. For example, if we want to understand the writings of Swami Vivekananda, if we want to understand the writings of Sri Aurobindo, or even if we think about the modern philosophers, then if we know their life, if we know their biography, if we know the incidents in their life, then we can little bit, up to some extent, we can understand that what could have been the factors which have influenced their life and which could have influenced their philosophy. So to understand the concepts which are explained by them, it becomes easy for us if we know their biography, if we know the factors which must have influenced their philosophical understanding, which must have influenced their thought process. So if we understand the background of author, then up to some extent we can easily understand the concepts which are explained by that person or the philosophy of that person. But in the case of ancient scholars like Maharshi Patanjali or Acharya Abhinavagupta or Acharya Vachaspati Mishra. So for these scholars who have been there before so many thousands of years, then it becomes difficult for us to understand their philosophy from their because we don't have the knowledge about their life. We do not much about who were their who were their teachers or what were the factors which must have influenced their thought process. So very little knowledge, very little information is available about their life and their background. So it becomes little difficult for us to understand the concepts and their thought process. So we have to understand their philosophy only with the help of the text which they have written. Now, about Maharshi Patanjali, also very little facts are known to us. We know that he was the author of Yoga Sutra, and he was also the author of Vyakarana Mahabhashya, which is the commentary on Ashtadhyayi of Panini, which is on the grammar. But other factors about the life of Maharshi Patanjali and what were the things which must have influenced his thought process, they are not known to us. And definitely, whenever the person is writing something, there must have been influence of the predecessors. Now, in the case of Maharshi Patanjali, we can say that there could have been influence of Maharshi Panini. At least that is known. And even there could have been other acharyas, other gurus of Maharshi Patanjali who must have influenced his philosophy or his thought process, but we don't have knowledge about them. So at least we can say that he has written commentary on Ashtadhyayi. So Panini was the source of inspiration for him, and definitely he could have followed some of the things of Panini. So in Yoga Sutra and in the sutras of Vyakaran, in Ashtadhyayi, we can see some of the similarities. We can say that Maharshi Patanjali, when he wrote Yoga Sutras, there can be influence of Panini, there can be influence of Ashtadhyayi. And what can be the similarities? How Maharshi Patanjali could have been influenced from Panini? As we know that Ashtadhyayi is also in the form of sutra, and Yoga Sutras which are written by Maharshi Patanjali, they are also in the form of sutra. And sutra is concise. Now, as we know that traditionally sutra is explained as Alpaksharam, Asandigdham, Saravat, Vishwato Mukham, Astobham Anavadyam Cha, Sutram Sutra Vido Viduhu. Now we know that these are the qualities of sutra, that it is Alpakshara. Sutra is always very small, it is concise. Asandigdha, it should be free from doubt. And there are other qualities also, but the main quality of sutra is it should be small. So even the sutras of Ashtadhyayi are also very small, and sutras of yoga are also very small. So whenever many things are explained in very limited words, with very less words in the sutra, we have to understand that Maharshi Patanjali has explained only the things which are essential, and we will not find even a single word which is unnecessary in the sutras. So, for the conceptual research, for the philosophical research, when we study the text, then we have to keep in mind that even a single word or even a single letter is not unessential. That means each and every word, whatever Maharshi Patanjali explains in the sutra, that is very important, that is must, and we have to understand all the concepts from that perspective. Another aspect, how Maharshi Patanjali could have been influenced from Maharshi Panini, like coining technical terms to denote the concepts. Now, in Vyakaran also, in Ashtadhyayi also, we find this particular quality that Panini defines a particular term. Now, I have given two examples here, and similarly, how in Yoga Sutra also we can see the similarity. That also example I would like to explain. Now, there is one sutra, the very first sutra of Ashtadhyayi, Vruddhi Radhaich. Now, the meaning of sutra is three letters, three vowels, A, I, and Au are called as Vruddhi. Now, otherwise in Sanskrit, the meaning of Vruddhi is growth. But especially in Vyakaran, Maharshi Panini is defining A, I, Au as Vruddhi. That means Vruddhi becomes a technical term. Vruddhi becomes Saudhnya specifically in the grammar. That means otherwise in the Sanskrit, the meaning of that word Vruddhi can be different. The meaning of Vruddhi is growth, but especially in the field of Vyakaran, that particular word Vruddhi will have the meaning as A, I, and Au. Similarly, another sutra is Alo Antyat Purva Upadha. Now, what is Upadha? So he says that the second last letter can be called as Upadha. So there is the style in Ashtadhyayi that otherwise in the language the words could have been differently used. They could have different meanings, but in that field, in the field of Vyakaran, the meaning of that word becomes different, and Panini defines the concepts. Similarly, in Yoga Shastra also, Maharshi Patanjali has mentioned some of the technical terms. He has given names to different concepts which can be called as Sangnya, which can be called as a technical term in English, or in Sanskrit we can call it as Saudhnya, and it will have different meaning in Yoga Shastra. So if we want to do conceptual research and if we want to understand the framework of the Yoga Shastra, then it is very essential, it is very important to understand what is the meaning of that particular word in the field of Yoga Shastra. Elsewhere, the meaning of that word can be different. Now, if I just say that if we compare yoga with the other darshanas, then also the meaning changes. And the very popular example I can give, the chitta is most essential word in Yoga Sutras because the all discussion is related to chitta. Maharshi Patanjali explains chitta vritti, chitta prasadana, chitta vikshepa. So chitta word is frequently used in Yoga Sutras. But if we compare Yoga philosophy and Vedanta philosophy, chitta word is mentioned in both of them. But the meaning or the interpretation of that chitta word is not same. Because in Vedanta, whenever they explain the word chitta, they define as smaranatmakam chitta. In Vedanta, they say that Antakaran is having four different aspects: Mana, Buddhi, Chitta, and Ahankar in Vedanta. So they say that whenever there is doubt in the mind, it is called as Mana. Whenever there is determinate knowledge, it is called as Buddhi. Whenever there is remembrance, whenever there is Smarana, only then it is called as Chitta. But in Yoga Shastra, remembrance or memory is only one vritti of Chitta. That means the concept of chitta in Vedanta and the concept of chitta in yoga is not the same. In Vedanta, only when we remember something, that particular aspect of antakaran is called as chitta, then only it is called as chitta. But here in Yoga Shastra, only when there is remembrance, only when there is memory, we are not calling it as chitta, but even in chitta, there can be pramana vritti, there can be viparya vritti, there can be vikalpa vritti, nidra vritti also. That means while understanding that particular shastra, we have to understand that words are mentioned in what sense, what is the meaning of that particular word in that particular shastra. So in Vedanta, the meaning of chitta can be different, in yoga the meaning of chitta can be different, or even in the Sanskrit language the meaning of that particular word can be different, and in Yoga Shastra the meaning of that word can be different. So for the conceptual understanding of that topic, it is very much essential to understand what is the meaning of that particular saudhya, what is the meaning of that particular word in the field of that shastra. So I would like to present some of the examples in Yoga Sutra where the general meaning of those words can be different in Sanskrit language, but in Yoga Shastra, these words are having the specific meaning. Now the first example is Sanyama. Now, generally in Sanskrit or even in Hindi or Marathi also we use the word Sanyama for patience. But in Yoga Shastra, what is the meaning of Sanyama? Dharana, Dhyan and Samadhi together, they are called as Sanyama. Like in the Sutra, Patanjali says, Trayam Ekatra Sanyamaha. So these three things together are called as Sanyama. And that is why if we try to translate the word Sanyama as patience in Yoga Shastra, that will be wrong. Because in Yoga Shastra, that word is having specific meaning and that is defined by Maharshi Patanjali. Another word is Vikalpa. General meaning of the word Vikalpa in Sanskrit or in Hindi is option. Like in Hindi also we use frequently this word Vikalpa, especially in the question papers or in the exams, this word is mentioned Vikalpa. जैसे नीचे दिए गए विकल्पों में से किसी दो को चुनिए या किसी दो का उत्तर दीजिए. So vikalpa is basically option, but in Yoga Shastra vikalpa is not used, means it is not mentioned in the sense of option, but vikalpa is one of the vrittis of chitta. And what is vikalpa vritti? So whenever with the help of power of words, when the image of unreal object is created in the chitta, that particular vritti is called as vikalpa vritti. Now for example, if I say, see in the sky the elephant is flying. Now whenever I say that elephant is flying in the sky, It is not possible. There cannot be elephant in the sky, but still, whenever we listen that sentence, our mind imagines that there is elephant in the sky, and that imaginary form in the antakaran, that imaginary vritti in the chitta can be called as vikalpa. So, general meaning in Sanskrit of vikalpa can be option, but in Yoga Shastra, it is not the option, but it is the vritti of chitta which is taking form of unreal object, of the imaginary object. Then another word is nidra. So general meaning of nidra is sleep. But according to Yoga Shastra, nidra is not the sleep, but nidra is the vritti of chitta. It is the thought which is present in the chitta in the sushupti avastha. So sushupti avastha can be defined as deep sleep. But in the deep sleep also, whatever is the form of chitta, whatever form is taken by chitta, that particular vritti is called as nidra. And Maharshi Patanjali defines abhava pratyalambana vrittir nidra. So he says that whenever we are in the deep sleep, there is knowledge of nothingness. See, it is not the absence of knowledge, but it is knowledge of absence. So even in Sushupti Avastha, we are having the knowledge, but it is not the knowledge about a particular object. It is the knowledge about nothingness, that there is nothing, there is nothing. So this nothingness is also perceived in Sushupti Avastha. So that particular thought, that particular vritti of chitta is called as nidra. Then Abhyasa word generally is translated as study or some practice. Even for yoga, we use the word yoga abhyasa. That means the practice of yoga. But especially in Yoga Shastra, abhyasa means effort taken for the stability of chitta. Tatra sthitau yatnaha. So Patanjali says yatna means effort for sthiti. Effort taken for the stability of chitta is called as abhyasa. So even this word abhyasa in Yoga Shastra is having a different meaning. It is not general study or it is not general practice. So it is having a specific meaning in the field of Yoga Shastra. Then Ashaya word. In Sanskrit, the meaning of Ashaya is summary. But according to Yoga, Ashaya means impressions created by karma. Then Yama. This is also one important thing. Yama, generally in Hindi, we say Yama is a god of death, Yama Devata. But in yoga, Yama means ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, and aparigraha. So it is having the specific meaning in Yoga Shastra. It is the technical term in Yoga Shastra. Another word is anvaya. In Sanskrit, the meaning of anvaya is association. But in Yoga Shastra, when Maharshi Patanjali mentions the word anvaya, then the meaning of anvaya is triguna, sattva, rajatama, because they are associated with all the objects of the world. So anvaya word is denoting sattva, rajatama. So if we want to do conceptual research and if we want to understand the framework of Yoga Shastra, framework of Yoga Sutra, then it is very much essential to understand what exactly is the meaning of these words in the field of Yoga Shastra. Then one more thing is important when we try to understand the scriptures. In the Shastra, the same word is mentioned with two different meanings. So, what are the words that convey two different concepts within the same Shastra? Now, in the previous slides, whatever words I explained, they are having only one meaning in Yoga Shastra. But even we find some of the words which are mentioned in the same Shastra, which are mentioned in the Yoga Shastra, but they are denoting two different meanings. For example, Abhinivesha. Now, Abhinivesha is one of the kleshas. Avidya, Asmita, Raga, Dvesha, and Abhinivesha. So, one meaning of Abhinivesha, which is very popular and everyone knows that meaning, that is the fear of death. So, it is considered as one of the kleshas. So, that Abhinivesha is klesha, and the meaning of that Abhinivesha is the fear of death. And the sutra is also mentioned. I will not read the sutra because it is displayed on the screen. Swara savahi vidushopi tatha rudha abhinivesha. So abhinivesha is fear of death, one meaning of that. But Maharshi Vyas in Vyasa Bhashya, he has explained another meaning of abhinivesha. So he's not mentioning the word abhinivesha only as fear of death, but he explains abhinivesha as the highest knowledge. Now see, this meaning seems to be very different. This meaning seems to be very much different than the first meaning. So fear of death is klesha, but Vyasa Bhashya mentions the word abhinivesha as fear of death also when he writes commentary on the sutra of abhinivesh. But elsewhere in another sutra's commentary, he has mentioned the word abhinivesha as highest knowledge. So Vyasa explains 6 stages of getting the knowledge: grahana, dharana, uha, apoha, tattvajnana, and abhinivesha is the last stage, and abhinivesha is the complete knowledge. Now, I will not explain all these stages, but the meaning of abhinivesha has we have to understand, and why the word has two different meanings. That is also important to understand, because in Sanskrit the etymology of the word is very important, and that according to that etymology, the word can convey two different meanings. Now, the word abhinivesha, it is having two prefixes. One is abhi, second is ni, and the basic verb is visha. The meaning of visha is to enter. Okay, then abhi is from all the sides, ni is below or downwards. So the meaning of abhinivesha is from all the sides, entering from all the sides and remaining stable there, being stable there. So even the fear of death also enters in our mind from all the sides, and it remains permanently in the chitta. Similarly, whenever we are getting knowledge of something and whenever we reach to the peak of that knowledge, then even for the highest knowledge which remains permanently in the chitta, the complete knowledge, that can also be called as abhinivesha. And Vyasa has mentioned the same meaning in this particular sentence. So abhinivesha means anything which comes from all the sides, which enters and which remains stable there. So especially in the chitta, the knowledge enters from all the sides, and when it remains stable there, it can be called as abhinivesha. So he has explained 6 different stages of how one can perceive the complete knowledge. So grahana, dharana, uha, apoha, tattvajnan, and the last stage is abhinivesha, when the yogi is having complete and firm knowledge in his chitta. So within the same shastra, the word abhinivesha is having two different meanings. So we have to understand where the word is having what kind of meaning. Then another word is smriti. So, in one sutra, that smriti word is mentioned as memory, which is the popular meaning, like anubhuta vishaya asampramoshaha smriti. So, smriti is one of the vrittis of chitta, and whatever we have already experienced, if the same thing is again remembered, then that particular thought of chitta is called as smriti vritti. This is the simple meaning of smriti. But in the another sutra, the meaning of smriti is not memory, but the meaning of smriti is meditation. The meaning of smriti is dhyana. So another sutra is Shraddha Virya Smriti Samadhi Prajna Purvaka Itaresham. So Maharshi Patanjali explains how the yogi can reach to the asampradnyat samadhi, how yogi can reach to the ultimate state of niruddha avastha. So he explains that there is journey of a yogi like Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna, Purvaka, Itaresham. Now, after Smriti, there is Samadhi. So the interpretation of the commentators is here the Smriti is not for memory, because Smriti is also Klishta Vritti, that smriti is also associated with klesha. So that smriti as a memory, it will not take yogi towards the ultimate state of niruddha avastha. So here the meaning of smriti is taken as meditation or dhyana. Now I also have mentioned here the sentence of Tattva Vaisharadi, the commentary of Vachaspati Mishra, where he clearly mentions that smriti dhyanam anakulam avikshiptam samadhiyate. So he says that smriti is not memory here, but smriti is dhyana. Smriti is meditation, which is not disturbed by any other obstacles. Anakulam, avikshiptam means there is no distraction. When the mind is completely focused and it is in the state of meditation, then that particular state is called as smriti. So, whenever we read the scripture and whenever we try to understand a particular text, then we have to keep in mind that even though the word is the same word, but it can have two different meanings within that shastra, within that scripture, and it is challenging to understand which is the meaning of this word at what place. Similarly, another two examples are also there. So in short, I will explain that. Vitarka word. So one meaning of Vitarka in Yoga Shastra is contemplation on gross object. So where Maharshi Patanjali explains the stages of Sampradnyat Samadhi, he says Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda, Asmita, Rupanugamat, Sampradnyataha. So these are the four stages of Sampradnyat Samadhi: Vitarka, Vichara, Ananda and Asmita. So here the meaning of Vitarka is when the person is meditating on the gross object, like flower or like murti, some idol. So whenever the person is meditating on the gross object, then that meditation is called as Vitarka. But in Yoga Sutra itself, the word Vitarka is mentioned with some other meaning also. So Vitarka word comes as opposites of yamas and niyamas. Vitarkaha himsadayaha krutakarita anumoditaha. Now that sutra is very long, so I have not mentioned the complete sutra, but here the meaning of Vitarka is himsa. Means we know that yama niyamas, there are 5 yamas and 5 niyamas: ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. So the opposites of yama means ahimsa, himsa, satya, asatya. So whatever are the opposites of yama niyamas, they are called as Vitarka. So one meaning of Vitarka is contemplation on gross object, and another meaning of Vitarka is opposites of yama niyamas. Similarly for jati also, one meaning of jati is birth and another meaning of jati is category. So even I have mentioned the sutras, so we can just understand that the meanings, the words which are mentioned in one shastra, within that scripture, there can be different interpretations, there can be two different meanings of the same word, and it is challenging to understand where, in which sutra, what is the meaning of that particular word. So whenever we are doing conceptual research, then it is very important to understand the meaning of that concept and what exactly is the interpretation of that word at that place, what is the interpretation of that word in that particular shastra, and accordingly only we can understand the meaning. Now we can think that already the scriptures are written, the Yoga Sutras are written, and even there are so many commentaries on Yoga Sutra. So the concepts can be understood by different persons in a different way. We may think that lot of work has already been done on yoga. We may think that so many people have already written on Yoga Sutra, they have written commentaries. So is there any scope for conceptual research now? So if we now, whatever we are going to discuss here, I can show you some of the examples that even though a lot of work has already been done in the field of yoga, but still there is a lot of scope for the conceptual research and for the philosophical research, because even whatever work is already done, even in that work also the interpretation of different people is different. So to understand the concept and to interpret the concept in a different way is possible, and even we can also have a different understanding of that concept. Now, this is one example where the Sanskrit commentators are also having the different interpretation. Now, we may think that those who are the Sanskrit commentators, they know the language better, they know the content better, and they know the meaning of words in that Shastra. But still, there can be different interpretation in the Sanskrit commentators also. And afterwards, I am going to explain to you how the English translators or in the other languages also, whenever the sutras are translated, how they are translating, they are commenting in a different way. So this is one sutra, tat pratishedhartham eka tattvabhyasaha. So Maharshi Patanjali says that if we want to get rid of the obstacles, then eka tattva abhyasa is important for that. Okay, now eka tattva means only one principle or one element. Now what is that eka tattva? So different commentators have interpreted that word eka tattva in a different way. Now in Tattva Vaisharadi of Vachaspati Mishra, he interprets ekam tattvam ishvaraha prakrutatvat. He says that one tattva, that one principle should be ishvara only. Yoga Vartik of Vijnana Bhikshu, he says that Ishwar is not that one tattva. He says that Ekam Sthuladi Kinchit. It should be mainly gross object, not the Ishwar. And he also says, Yattu Eka Tattva Shabdena Atra Parameshwara Eva Ukta Iti Tanna. Means Vijnana Bhikshu is refuting the opinion of Vachaspati Mishra. He says that whatever is said by Vachaspati Mishra that Eka Tattva should be Ishvara, it is not correct. So other commentator is not accepting the views of Vachaspati Mishra. And in Bhoja Vritti, he says that Eka Tattva means what? Kasminchit Abhimate Tattve. He says that Eka Tattva should not be specifically Ishwar, or that Eka Tattva should not be specifically the gross object. He says that Abhimata means it can be any Eka Tattva. He says that if Maharshi Patanjali has not mentioned any specific Tattva, then why should we confine that Eka Tattva to only one particular principle? That Eka Tattva can be any one Tattva. It can be any one principle which can be Abhimata, which can be favorable for the person who is meditating. That means in Sanskrit also there can be different understanding, there can be different conceptual interpretation of the scholars. And in English also, we can, if we compare the translations in English, then also we find there can be different interpretation of the scholars. Now, this is the very popular Yoga Sutra, as we all know, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. But if we compare the translations, then there is a lot of differences in the translations. Now, someone says that Nirodha. Now, Nirodha word is translated as suppression or inhibition or process of ending or cessation or restraint or even control or hindering, bringing to complete cessation. That means if we compare all the English translations, they try to interpret the concept of nirodha in a different way. Now, if we pay attention to the words which are mentioned by them, suppression is a different concept and cessation is a different concept. Inhibition or prohibition, that is a different thing, and process of ending, that is a different thing. That means what? More or less, these words are conveying the similar kind of meaning, but they are not exactly the same. Even for the translation of chitta vritti, someone says modifications of the mind. Some Vyasa Hoston, he says that vritti is definitions. Now this is very unique translation which he has done, and even for the chitta he uses the word field of consciousness. Now whether this interpretation matches to the interpretation of Maharshi Patanjali, that is the different thing, but still we can find the differences in the commentaries. And if we want to understand the basic concept of Yoga Shastra, I think that we should refer to the original text of Yoga Sutra, and the translations are trying to convey their own interpretation. Because if we try to understand from the yoga point of view, then consciousness can be related to Purusha. It is not related to the consciousness. Chitta is not related to the consciousness, but he is trying to explain Chitta as the field of consciousness. So this is one interpretation of scholar. Then even someone is trying to translate Chitta Vritti as the thought waves. Someone is trying to explain Chitta as mind stuff, thinking principle, then mental operations or mental modifications or functional modifications. These are the different translations of Yoga Sutra. And if we pay attention to the selection of the words, then we find that it is more or less, it appears to be the same, but still the words are having little different meaning. So even so many translators have tried to interpret Yoga Sutras or the scriptures of yoga, and their understanding of the concept is not exactly the same. So the interpretation and the conceptual research is still possible in Yoga Shastra, and we can have different interpretation, we can have different understanding, because to understand a particular concept, we have to understand the complete network of that Yoga Shastra. We have to understand the complete network of the sutras, and then only the complete knowledge of that particular Shastra is possible. Now, I'm going to another topic. What can be the scope of research in the in yoga, especially in the textual research or in the philosophical research, this is one interesting thing where the research is possible about the sequence of sutras. So Maharshi Patanjali has explained the concepts in a specific sequence. Okay, as we know, Atha Yoga Anushasanam, Yogaschitta Vritti Nirodha, and whatever is the sequence of sutra. Now, can we think in a different point of view? Can we arrange the sutras in a different sequence? That is also another scope of research, what I think. And should one learn the sutras in the same sequence in which they are mentioned in the text? That is also one question, because whenever we read the sutras in a sequence, now for example, Vrittayaha Panchatayaha Klishta Klishtaha, this is in the first pada, fifth sutra. Here Maharshi Patanjali is mentioning there are two types of vrittis, Klishta vrittis and Aklishta vrittis. But to understand Klishta vrittis, Klishta is related to klesha, the afflictions, but the afflictions are explained in the second chapter. So in the first chapter, he is mentioning the Klishta vrittis and Aklishta vrittis, but to understand what exactly is Klishta, we should understand what is klesha, and that klesha is explained in the second chapter. He says, Avidya, Asmita, Raga, Dvesha, Abhiniveshaha, Kleshaha. So kleshas are explained in the second chapter. So the sequence of sutras given by Maharshi Patanjali can be different, but whenever we are learning Yoga Sutra, should we learn Klesha Sutra first and then we come to Klishta Vrittis? That can also be one question. Or another example can be Tada Drashtuhu Swarupe Avasthanam. So this is the third sutra in the first chapter where he is mentioning the word Drashta. But who is Drashta? Whether Purusha is Drashta or Chitta is Drashta or what exactly is Drashta? So Drashta means seer or knower. So Drashta is defined in the second chapter in the 20th sutra. He says Drashta, Drushi Matraha, Shuddhopi Pratyayanupashya. That means in the first chapter, if we go in a sequence, Tada Drashtuhu Swarupe Avasthanam, Drashta word is mentioned here, but who is Drashta? That explanation is given in the second chapter. So, is there any possibility where we can arrange the sutras in a different sequence? And even that is also already done. This is not the new thought, but if we think about the Vyakaran again, then the sequence which is given by Maharshi Panini, that is one sequence in Ashtadhyayi, and there is another text in Vyakaran, Siddhanta Kaumudi, where Bhattoji Dikshit has arranged all the sutras of Ashtadhyayi in a different sequence. Similarly, can we arrange the sutras of yoga in a different sequence to understand the concepts in a proper way? That is also a vast, we can say, a scope of research in that field. And another important thing, as we know that sutra is very much concise, so is it possible that the same concept is explained in four different sutras? And why Maharshi Patanjali is doing so? So he is explaining the concept of Kaivalya in four different sutras. Now, as we know that one particular thing can be defined in one sutra or it can be defined in one or two sutras, but there are four sutras on Kaivalya. So, if the sutras have to be very much concise, then wherever Maharshi Patanjali is explaining one particular concept in many sutras, what could have been the purpose of, what could have been the intention of Maharshi Patanjali? That also we can understand only when we understand the sequence of sutra and what is the purpose of that. Because one sutra of Kaivalya comes in second chapter 2.25, another sutra is 3.50, third sutra is 3.55, and fourth sutra is 4.34. That means there are four sutras on Kaivalya and they appear at different places in Yoga Sutra. So what could have been the purpose? What could have been the intention of Maharshi Patanjali when he explains these sutras? That is also a very much, we can say there is a point where the research can be done. Now, as I have little time, so I will just go through all these slides. When we say yoga is Astik Darshan, and Astik means not in philosophy, we know that Astik is not related to accepting Ishwar or not accepting Ishwar, like Astik, Nastik, generally we understand. But Astik means the system which accepts validity of Veda, which accept the validity of Vedic literature. So when we say yoga is Astik Darshan, then there is a lot of scope for research in yoga, because Maharshi Patanjali has not mentioned any particular mantra of Veda when he explains the concepts of Yoga Sutra. So even we can find out what are the sources in Vedic literature which could have influenced the philosophy of yoga, which could have influenced the thought process of Maharshi Patanjali when he has explained the concepts of yoga. So we can relate Yoga Sutras with the concepts of Upanishad, and there is a lot of scope for research, because when we say yoga is Astik Darshan, but still there is no reference of any Veda mantra, there is no reference of any Upanishad sentence in the Yoga Sutra, or even in the commentaries also there are very few quotations taken from the Upanishads or from the Vedic literature. So this is also very important, we can say, place where the research can be done. And most of the times mantras of Upanishads are interpreted on the line of Advaita Vedanta, because Upanishads can be considered as the part of Vedanta. We know that in Prasthanatraya, Upanishad, Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutra, they are considered as the part of Advaita Vedanta or Vedanta. But is it possible to interpret Upanishads or Vedic literature on the line of Yoga Shastra? That is also a different field for research, and a lot of research can be done on this line also. Now, this is one structure in Yoga Shastra where the research is possible. Now, this is one thing which can be helpful for all the research of yoga. In yoga, mainly we can say there can be two branches: Hatha Yoga and Patanjala Yoga. Now we know that Hatha Yoga is also part of yoga, Patanjali Yoga is also part of yoga, but the difference can be like Hatha Yoga is more emphasizing on the physical aspect, and Patanjali Yoga is more emphasizing on the mental aspect, more on chitta. So if we compare these two, then we can say if we want to do research, so now this particular diagram we can understand from the core part. Okay, Hatha Yoga and Patanjali Yoga. So there can be scope for research. There can be comparative research on the yoga text. So we can compare the commentaries of Patanjali Yoga, Vyasa Bhashya, Bhoja Vritti, Tattva Vaisharadi. And if we want to do research in the yoga text on Hatha Yoga, then Gheranda Samhita, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or Hatha Ratnavali, Hatha Kaumudi. So these are the scriptures on Yoga Shastra itself, and there can be lot of philosophical research possible, lot of conceptual research possible within the yoga text, because the concept in one yoga text and the concept in the other yoga text can be different. So there can be one field of research where the research can be done within the yoga scriptures. If we want to go beyond the yoga periphery, then if we want to compare Yoga Shastra with the other Indian traditions, then we can compare yoga philosophy with Kashmir Shaivism. We can compare yoga philosophy with Vedanta, with Bauddha Darshan, with Nyaya Darshan. Similarly, we can compare Hatha Yoga with Tantra tradition, with Natha tradition, with Siddha tradition. So these are the traditions which are part of Indian traditions, which are Indian traditions, but which are not yoga. So Kashmir Shaivism or Vedanta, Bauddha, which are the other darshanas. So the comparison of yoga is possible with the other traditions also. We can have comparative study of yoga with the other tradition which are non-Indian tradition. Like we can compare the philosophy, Western philosophy and Yoga Shastra. And also, apart from philosophy, there could be other fields also, like psychology, ethics, spirituality, linguistics, behavioral science, or medical science, management, biology. So these are not the fields of philosophy, but beyond philosophy also the research can be done. So I have tried to make one figure, I have tried to make one diagram where we can understand what is the scope of research in yoga. So one is within the yoga, one is yoga, then Indian traditions, another is yoga and the Western traditions, and yoga beyond philosophy with the other fields also, how the research is possible. So in this particular diagram I have tried to simplify the things how the research is possible in yoga and with the other fields also related to yoga. Now, this is one thing which I would like to show, where this is completely a different concept where the research has been done. Now, this is one diagram which I have taken from the book Human Physiology by Dr. Tony Nather, and he interprets that in our brain all the sutras of yoga are there. So I would like to just quote what he says. He says, Tony Nather, he has interpreted the connection of 195 sutras of yoga with the fibers of the cerebral cortex. The total number of association fibers can be divided into 195 sets. They correspond to 195 sutras of yoga. Furthermore, the dimensions of the brain area and the length of the sutras also correspond to each other. So this is very unique kind of research, and this is not we can say conventional method of research, but he has tried to interpret how there can be connection of 195 sutras of yoga with the cerebral cortex, and how there can be interconnection of 195 sutras with uh, uh, the brain, and how he's trying to show the corresponding things with the cerebral cortex and the yoga sutras. So this is the image, and he has also tried to interpret how there can be sutras of all four chapters, 195 sutras of yoga sutra corresponding to the brain and the cerebral cortex. Now I'm not very much familiar with the physiology or anatomy, but still I found this to be a unique kind of research, and therefore I'm just sharing this with you. Now, the last thing I would like to talk on is, in yoga, philosophical research can be done, conceptual research can be done, but we are doing research on the text which are already published. But still we have to understand that there are many texts on yoga shastra which are still unpublished. There are so many manuscripts in various libraries and personal collections, so there are so many texts which are not yet published. According to descriptive catalog of yoga manuscripts published by Kaivalya Dham, there are 2,874 manuscripts under 837 titles. Now, if we try to think how many books on yoga, how many traditional scriptures on yoga are published, so we may not go beyond 50, 60 or 70. Means if we take all the commentaries of Yoga Sutra, Yoga Upanishads and the text of Hatha Yoga, then almost we can say that not more than 100 scriptures are yet published. But there are more than that, so many scriptures which are not yet published, and if the unpublished works come in light, they will definitely be helpful in developing the conceptual understanding of yoga. And this is one website developed by Indian government, National Manuscript Mission, where all the manuscripts, they record where, in which library they are, in which personal collection they are. So all the information is available on this website. So this is also a very unique field where the research is needed to be done, because so many people are doing research with the only available material, with the books which are already available. But apart from that also, so many scriptures are not available. So even reading the manuscripts, making the edition and printing them, that is also a vast field of research. So there are also unpublished works which are not yet published, the publication has to be done. So that is also another important thing which I wanted to share. Now, these are some of the things, how the manuscripts are published, how the editing work is done. That is one thing which I wanted to share, but as there is lack of time, I will not explain this particular thing. Finally, at the end, I would like to summarize that when the person wants to do conceptual or philosophical research, what are the challenges in front of him? Because most of the scriptures of yoga, they are in Sanskrit, or they are in the traditional languages like Tibetan or Prakrit, especially the Buddhist yoga in Tibetan language or in Pali language, or in Jain tradition, the scriptures are in the Prakrit language. So one has to properly understand the languages, and if the books are unpublished, one should also have the knowledge of different scripts, like Sharada or Brahmi, in which the manuscripts are written. Then another challenge is to understand the meaning of concept within that Shastra, and to understand the network or interconnectivity of different concepts within that Shastra. So for example, in Yoga Sutra, there are three words: Sampradnyata Samadhi or Sampradnyata, then Samadhi and Samapatti. So more or less these three words are interpreted in a same way. But what is the interconnectivity of all sutras, that should also be understood. And the person has to have knowledge of Sanskrit language, he should have the knowledge of that particular Shastra, and then only he can understand, then only the research can be done. So these are the challenges in front of a person. So this is what I wanted to share. So I hope whatever I presented, you like that. I hope that. And thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. And I stop here. Thank you so much, organizers. Thank you so much.